What if the darkest secrets of World War II were never meant to be uncovered? Hidden alliances, forbidden missions, and buried technologies that could have changed the fate of the world. These aren't just alternate histories, they're warnings, locked away for a reason. But today, we're opening the box, and once you see what's inside, you can't unsee it. In the summer of 1940, the clouds of war loomed darkest over Europe. Nazi Germany had swiftly overrun France and Belgium, and Britain stood isolated, defiant behind the English Channel. Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's audacious plan to invade the British Isles, was drafted but never executed. The Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force had held the line, making a sea invasion seem impossible. But imagine a different world, where the Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine combined forces with brutal efficiency and overwhelmed British defenses. The invasion was launched on a foggy morning in September 1940, catching the island nation off guard and forcing a new chapter in World War II. The German invasion fleet, far larger and better prepared than in actual history, crossed the Channel under cover of darkness. This time, the Luftwaffe gained temporary air superiority through a concentrated attack on RAF airfields, crippling British fighter defenses. Meanwhile, the Kriegsmarine protected transport ships ferrying tens of thousands of troops to southern England's shores. The initial landing waves struck the beaches near Dover, Folkestone, and Ramsgate, overwhelming local defenses with blitzkrieg tactics honed on the continent. Coastal artillery and hastily mobilized British units were pushed back or destroyed. Within days, the Germans secured a foothold stretching from the Kent coastline inland. British commands scrambled to reinforce the front lines, but the rapid advance of mechanized divisions and the Luftwaffe's control of the skies made counterattacks costly and ineffective. London braced for the worst, as German propaganda broadcasts attempted to demoralize the population, encouraging surrender. The government relocated key officials and military command centers to safer locations, but the public's spirit hardened. Resistance grew quickly as civilians and irregular units began guerrilla warfare, disrupting supply lines and sabotaging communications. The British Home Guard, alongside secretive intelligence operatives, coordinated with remnants of the British Army and RAF pilots who had escaped capture or death. In the countryside, sabotage and ambushes became common, forcing German troops to divert resources from frontline combat to internal security. Yet the Wehrmacht pressed forward, securing key cities one by one: Canterbury, Maidstone, and finally the outskirts of London itself. The fall of London in early 1941 marked a grim milestone. German forces established a military government with Reichskommissars, aiming to integrate Britain into the Greater German Reich as a subservient province. The British monarchy was sidelined but remained a symbolic beacon for resistance. The Nazis implemented harsh occupation policies, suppressing dissent with brutal efficiency. Arrests, executions, and mass deportations of suspected resistance members created an atmosphere of fear and oppression. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States watched the unfolding tragedy with increasing alarm. Roosevelt's government ramped up aid to the Free British forces still operating overseas, including those evacuated to Canada and the colonies. Winston Churchill, now leading a government in exile from Canada, pleaded for American military intervention. The U.S. Navy tightened blockades around the British Isles, making resupply dangerous and slow for the German occupiers. The Axis powers appeared stronger than ever. With Britain subdued, Hitler turned his attention eastward with renewed confidence, preparing for the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 with less fear of British interference. However, the British resistance within the island grew fiercer, evolving into a coordinated underground network. Sabotage teams blew up railway lines, assassinated key German officers, and intercepted communications vital to German operations. The Gestapo and SS forces were stretched thin, fighting an invisible war within the cities. Across Europe, the news of Britain's occupation shocked the Allied nations. France was under direct Nazi control, but the hope of British resistance had kept morale alive. Now, with Britain fallen, the Soviet Union found itself more isolated on the Eastern Front. Stalin accelerated his military industrialization, but doubts and fear spread throughout Allied command structures. Despite this, the British resistance managed to keep secret radio communications alive, transmitting intelligence to London and Washington. Special Operations Executive (SOE) agents infiltrated occupied Britain to train resistance cells and plan sabotage operations. These covert efforts slowed German efforts to exploit Britain's industrial capacity, sabotaging factories and limiting resource extraction. The civilian population suffered tremendously. Food shortages, rationing, and forced labor under German command led to unrest and despair. Yet, amidst the hardship, cultural and artistic expressions of hope and defiance flourished underground. Secret newspapers circulated, sharing news of the Free British forces fighting abroad and encouraging unity. In late 1942, the tide began to shift. The Soviet Union's counteroffensive at Stalingrad drew German resources eastward, weakening their grip on Britain. American forces prepared for a direct invasion of Europe, aiming to liberate occupied nations including Britain. Intelligence reports indicated the Germans had underestimated the resilience of the British people and the logistical nightmare of occupying an island with a hostile population. The final chapters of this alternate history see a prolonged conflict within Britain itself, half occupied, half liberated, as Allied forces launched daring commando raids and eventual full-scale liberation campaigns. The cost in human life was staggering, cities lay in ruins, but the spirit of freedom endured. What if Operation Sea Lion had succeeded? The world would have witnessed a darker, longer war with Britain under the shadow of the swastika. But in every shadow, resistance and hope survive. The story of this alternate invasion reminds us that even when the impossible seems possible, the will to fight for liberty burns fiercely in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. In the tangled web of alliances and enmities during World War II, the Soviet Union and Imperial Japan were bitter rivals locked in a tense standoff along the Siberian and Manchurian borders. Their mutual distrust shaped much of the conflict in Asia and the Pacific, with the Soviet Union focused on its brutal fight against Nazi Germany and Japan pushing southward into China and the Pacific Islands. But what if, in a stunning twist of history, these two powers, enemies on paper, had secretly forged an alliance? This is the story of Operation Siberian Thunder, a speculative scenario where the Axis powers expanded into a formidable three-front war, fundamentally altering the fate of the Second World War. It began in late 1941, just months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Both Moscow and Tokyo faced growing pressures. Japan was bogged down in China, facing increasing resistance and struggling to maintain supply lines across vast, hostile territory. The Soviet Union, after the brutal winter battles outside Moscow and Leningrad, was locking horns with Hitler's forces on the Eastern Front. Secret diplomatic channels opened, quietly brokered by pragmatic generals and opportunistic politicians who saw mutual benefit in cooperation. The secret pact was simple but devastating. Japan would open a northern front against Nazi forces from the east, while the Soviets could leverage Japanese control over Manchuria and northern China to threaten German positions from the southeast. In exchange, the Soviets agreed to ease pressure on Japan's southern ambitions in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The alliance was cemented by a shared enemy, Nazi Germany, and a mutual desire to carve up Asia and Europe between themselves once victory was assured. By mid-1942, the consequences were catastrophic for the Axis and Allied powers alike. The Japanese Guandong Army, reinforced with Soviet advisors and new Soviet weaponry, launched a massive assault into Siberia. This was no repeat of the border skirmishes of the late 1930s, but a full-scale invasion aimed at cutting off German supply lines deep in Eastern Europe and crippling the Wehrmacht's ability to fight on the Eastern Front. Simultaneously, Soviet troops, now supported by Japanese air forces operating from captured airfields in Manchuria, struck from the east with devastating precision. The German Army Group Center, which had pushed deep into the Soviet Union, found itself caught in a vice of converging enemies. The multi-front assault stretched German logistics beyond breaking, and supply convoys were attacked relentlessly by coordinated Soviet-Japanese air raids. The German High Command, shocked by this new front, scrambled to redeploy troops from Western Europe to reinforce their crumbling eastern defenses. This weakened their position against the Allies preparing to open a Western front. The Atlantic Wall defenses were undermanned and poorly supplied, setting the stage for a very different D-Day scenario. Meanwhile, Hitler's strategic focus was torn between holding the Eastern Front and containing the Pacific threat, an impossible balancing act. On the Pacific side, the Soviets provided critical intelligence and covert support to Japanese operations. Using Soviet rail networks and factories, Japan was able to produce and supply troops at an unprecedented scale. Siberian rail lines were expanded and modernized to transport weapons, tanks, and troops rapidly across thousands of miles of frozen wilderness. This logistical miracle gave the Axis a surprising edge in a region previously considered too vast and harsh for large-scale warfare. The Allied powers, stunned by this new front, struggled to adapt. American and British forces in the Pacific were forced into defensive stances, unable to secure vital territories like the Aleutian Islands and northern Pacific bases. The United States diverted naval and air assets to protect the vulnerable northwest coast of America and Canada, stretching resources thin. As winter fell in 1942, the Soviet-Japanese front froze into a deadly stalemate of trench warfare and brutal guerrilla raids across Siberian forests. Yet, unlike the historical harshness that slowed Nazi advances, this front saw rapid advances and retreats, with control of key cities like Novosibirsk and Irkutsk changing hands multiple times. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, enduring shortages and brutal repression from occupying forces on both sides. The most striking impact was on the German war machine itself. By early 1943, German losses on the Eastern Front had skyrocketed, and morale plummeted. Without the ability to resupply or reinforce their armies effectively, German offensives stalled. The hoped for quick victory over the Soviet Union was impossible, and the Nazi command faced growing dissent and plotting from within. Meanwhile, the American strategy in the Pacific shifted dramatically. With Japan's northern front holding strong, the United States accelerated its island-hopping campaign in the central and southern Pacific, targeting Japanese supply lines and naval bases further south. But the war in Asia dragged on much longer, as the Soviet-Japanese alliance made quick victories impossible. This alliance also prevented the Soviet invasion of Manchuria in 1945, a key element of Japan's historical surrender. Instead, Japan remained a stronghold with vast industrial resources intact, prolonging conflict in Asia by years. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while still devastating, had less immediate effect on ending the war given Japan's strengthened northern position. In Europe, the Western Allies were forced to fight a protracted war on a weakened front. The delay in opening D-Day allowed Germany to fortify the Atlantic Wall and maintain control of occupied Europe longer than expected. The Soviets, still bogged down in the East, had less influence on the post-war negotiations. The Cold War, if it emerged at all, would look very different in this world. Ultimately, the Soviet-Japanese alliance fractured in late 1944 under the pressure of competing ambitions and internal distrust. But by then, the damage was done. The Axis powers had extended their hold and reshaped the global conflict in unpredictable ways. The war dragged into 1947, with millions more casualties and shattered landscapes across Asia and Europe. Operation Siberian Thunder remains one of the wildest what-if scenarios of World War II history, a chilling vision of a world where enemies unite against common foes, unleashing devastation on a scale even the darkest chapters of history had never seen. The story challenges the notion of alliances and reminds us that in war, shifting loyalties and pragmatism can alter the course of humanity forever. The success of the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, is often attributed not just to the overwhelming force of Allied troops but to the intricate deception plan known as Operation Fortitude. This vast campaign of misinformation convinced Nazi Germany that the invasion would strike at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France, rather than the real target, Normandy. But what if the deception had been even more effective than history remembers? So successful that the Germans fully committed their forces to the wrong beaches, allowing the real invasion to be delayed. This story explores an alternate timeline where the Allies' ghost army tricked the Nazis too well, with dramatic consequences on the course of World War II. In early 1944, Allied intelligence and counterintelligence agencies, including the British MI5 and the American OSS, orchestrated an elaborate ruse. Inflatable tanks, fake radio transmissions, and double agents painted a vivid picture of an invasion force gathering near Dover and across southeastern England, aimed squarely at Pas-de-Calais. German commanders, already anxious and unsure, accepted this narrative almost without question. Field Marshal Rommel, commanding forces along the Atlantic Wall, pushed hard to reinforce defenses near Calais. In this alternate history, the Allies took the deception a step further. They constructed entire dummy divisions, known as the Phantom Armies, equipped with inflatable vehicles and fake camps, visible from German reconnaissance planes. The fake radio traffic was so convincing that German codebreakers decrypted plans that seemingly confirmed a massive invasion was imminent at Calais, not Normandy. When June 6 arrived, the Allies launched the real amphibious assault on Normandy's beaches. Yet, the overwhelming German presence remained entrenched miles away in Pas-de-Calais, believing the main assault would come days or weeks later. The result was a shockingly bloodier initial landing, as Normandy's beaches were defended by veteran troops and well-prepared artillery. The Allies sustained heavier casualties and struggled to secure beachheads under intense fire. Unable to break through quickly, the Allied command decided to delay the full invasion of France, regrouping and sending reinforcements across the Channel in smaller, riskier waves. The Germans, confident in their intelligence and their strong presence at Calais, refused to redeploy significant forces southward. Meanwhile, the Allied Ghost Army at Dover maintained its elaborate ruse, continuing to send radio signals and fake troop movements to hold German attention fixed in the wrong place. This stalemate stretched through the summer of 1944, with fierce fighting in Normandy becoming a war of attrition. The Allies struggled to establish supply lines, with many convoys targeted by German U-boats and fighter bombers patrolling the Channel. The delay frustrated leaders in Washington, London, and Moscow, all eager for a swift end to the war. Back in Germany, Hitler's confidence grew. He believed his Atlantic Wall fortifications were holding firm and that the Allies' real invasion was yet to come. Divisions were moved from the Eastern Front to reinforce northern France, slowing Soviet advances in the east. The Wehrmacht regained some momentum, launching counterattacks that pushed the Allies back toward the beaches on several occasions. Amidst this tense standstill, resistance movements across France became vital. French partisans, sensing the prolonged conflict, intensified sabotage on German supply routes, communication lines, and railways. Allied special forces trained and equipped these resistance fighters, aiming to disrupt German operations and support eventual breakout attempts. Winter of 1944 approached with grim uncertainty. The prolonged campaign in Normandy took a heavy toll on morale and resources on both sides. The infamous Battle of the Bulge, a German counteroffensive, erupted earlier and with greater intensity due to the redeployment of troops that might otherwise have been tied up on other fronts. In this alternate timeline, the prolonged fighting in France delayed the liberation of Paris until early 1945, with widespread destruction across northern France. The Allies' delayed breakout gave the Germans precious months to fortify positions across Europe and strengthen the Eastern Front defenses. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's forces pushed westward but found themselves facing stronger German resistance than anticipated. The delay of D-Day and the prolonged Western Front fighting meant fewer German divisions were redeployed east, but the increased German focus on defensive tactics forced brutal, costly battles in Poland and beyond. Meanwhile, American and British leaders considered bold new strategies to break the deadlock. Plans for intensified bombing campaigns against German industry and infrastructure were approved. Air raids on rail yards and oil refineries grew more frequent, aiming to cripple the Nazi war machine from the skies. At the same time, Allied spies and saboteurs worked feverishly behind enemy lines to destabilize the German hold on occupied territories. The war in Europe dragged on well into 1945, with both sides exhausted. Though the Allies eventually broke through the Atlantic Wall and liberated France, the cost in lives and material was staggering. The delay also impacted the Pacific theater, as the U.S. could not redirect as many resources to the fight against Japan until the European War began winding down. This extended conflict created a very different geopolitical aftermath. The Soviet Union pushed deeper into Europe before Allied forces met them, leading to larger Soviet-controlled territories after the war. The Cold War boundaries shifted, with a stronger Soviet presence in Central Europe and heightened tensions across the continent. The Ghost Army's deception, originally designed to save lives by preventing a catastrophic German counterattack, paradoxically prolonged the war and increased casualties. Its success in misleading the enemy became a double-edged sword. The story is a powerful reminder of the unpredictable consequences of intelligence and misinformation in wartime. What if the Allies had deceived too well? The sacrifices and strategies on D-Day could have led to a grimmer, longer war with higher costs for freedom. But even in this shadowed history, the courage of soldiers and civilians on all sides endured, shaping a world forever changed by the battle for Europe. World War II was a conflict defined by technological innovation, tanks, radar, jet engines, and nuclear physics. But beneath the surface of the well-known battles and political machinations, a secret program was unfolding within the heart of Nazi Germany. In the shadowed halls of the Third Reich's top scientific complexes, a visionary group of engineers and physicists pursued an unimaginable goal: to conquer space. This is the story of Hitler's secret space program, the Nazi Moon Project, an alternate history where the war expanded beyond Earth, reshaping humanity's destiny. The origins of the Nazi space program trace back to 1938, when Wernher von Braun and his team began developing the V-2 rocket, a weapon that would terrorize London skies during the Blitz. But von Braun harbored ambitions far greater than ballistic missiles. Inspired by early rocket pioneers and theoretical physicists, he dreamed of sending humans beyond the atmosphere. Hitler, obsessed with grandeur and eternal legacy, secretly approved funding for a moon rocket under the code name Project Schattenfalk, Project Shadowhawk. Concealed beneath the guise of weapons research, teams worked in underground facilities in Thuringia and Bavaria, hidden from Allied intelligence and even much of the Nazi leadership. By 1943, the program had advanced beyond mere theory. Engineers had constructed a massive prototype, the A-10 rocket, a multi-stage vehicle capable of reaching low Earth orbit. But Hitler demanded more: a mission to the moon itself, meant to establish a lunar base from which the Third Reich could exert power beyond Earth. The scientific challenges were immense. Life support, navigation, and propulsion required breakthroughs that pushed the boundaries of 1940s technology. Forced laborers, scientists, and engineers worked around the clock, driven by a mix of fear, fanaticism, and hope for a new frontier. Secret testing sites in the Black Forest and isolated parts of the Bavarian Alps hosted rocket launches, some successful, many catastrophic. Meanwhile, Allied espionage agencies were baffled by mysterious missile launches and strange radio signals detected from Germany. Speculation ran rampant, but no concrete proof of a space program emerged. Hitler kept the project cloaked in secrecy, fearing that revealing it prematurely might inspire panic or invite sabotage. As the war turned against Germany in 1944, desperate measures accelerated the moon program. Hitler ordered the creation of a specialized astronaut corps, pilots trained to endure the vacuum of space and the psychological strain of isolation. These volunteers, recruited from elite Luftwaffe units, underwent harsh training in simulated zero-gravity chambers and psychological conditioning. In the spring of 1945, with Allied forces closing in on Berlin and Soviet troops advancing from the east, the Nazis launched their most audacious mission. The first unmanned probe, the A-10A, was sent on a trajectory to orbit the moon and return photographs to Earth. The mission was partially successful. The probe transmitted grainy images of the lunar surface before communication was lost. Encouraged, Hitler ordered a manned mission to the moon. The launch site, hidden deep in the Bavarian Alps, prepared a specially modified A-12 rocket, equipped with a small crew cabin. The world below was engulfed in chaos, but the Nazi propaganda machine spun a narrative of scientific triumph, promising a new dawn for Germany. The crew consisted of 3 men: pilot Hauptmann Ernst Keller, engineer Dr. Fritz Weber, and scientist Dr. Helga Mahler, a rare female astronaut chosen for her expertise. Their mission: to land on the moon, establish a small base, and claim the satellite for the Reich. The launch on May 1, 1945, was witnessed only by a few high-ranking officers and scientists. The rocket thundered into the sky, vanishing beyond the atmosphere. 4 hours, the fate of the crew was unknown as tense silence gripped the hidden launch complex. Unbeknownst to the world, the Nazi moon mission achieved a miraculous feat. The A-12 successfully entered lunar orbit, and the crew made a rough landing near the moon's Mare Imbrium. They planted a swastika flag and set up a small automated radio transmitter, broadcasting a chilling message of German conquest beyond Earth. Back on Earth, the news broke amid the chaos of Germany's collapse. Allied leaders were stunned, and the world's attention shifted momentarily to the space race in an unexpected wartime theater. However, the war's end and the Allied occupation of Germany disrupted further development. The lunar base was quickly abandoned, but the technology, plans, and dreams survived. In the post-war years, both the United States and the Soviet Union seized Nazi rocket scientists and technology, spurring the real-life space race of the Cold War. The Nazi moon project became a dark legend, whispered in intelligence circles and speculative histories, a terrifying glimpse of what might have been had the Third Reich achieved dominance beyond Earth. Had Hitler's secret space program succeeded fully, the implications would have been staggering. A Nazi lunar base could have served as a launchpad for weapons or surveillance, tipping the balance of power in the world. It might have prolonged the war or led to a new arms race in space decades earlier than history records. The story of the Nazi moon project is a testament to human ambition, scientific genius, and the dark paths power can take when unmoored from morality. It blends fact with fiction, revealing how the most desperate times can inspire the most extraordinary and terrifying dreams. Amid the darkest chapters of World War II, the Holocaust stands as a symbol of unimaginable horror, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others under Nazi Germany. History remembers the courage of those who resisted, but the overwhelming scale of death is a haunting tragedy. Yet, what if a secret, shadowy network had succeeded in saving millions? An underground operation so vast and effective it changed the fate of the Holocaust itself. This story imagines the Liberation Line, a covert international effort that outsmarted the Nazis and rewrote the narrative of survival during the Second World War. The origins of the Liberation Line trace back to 1939, when a small group of diplomats, rabbis, and resistance fighters from across Europe came together in neutral Switzerland. They realized that traditional methods of rescue, individual escapes, hidden refuges, were insufficient in the face of Nazi industrial-scale deportations and exterminations. Instead, they crafted a daring plan to create an extensive network that could smuggle entire communities out of occupied Europe, using false identities, forged documents, secret routes, and the cooperation of brave civilians. This network leveraged underground rail lines, abandoned tunnels, and hidden river passages to transport Jews and other targeted groups to safe zones in neutral countries like Switzerland, Sweden, and Spain. It also coordinated with sympathetic factions inside the Allied and even Axis powers, bribing officials and exploiting bureaucratic loopholes. The operation was decentralized but fiercely coordinated through coded messages and trusted couriers. The risks were staggering. Any infiltration by the Gestapo or SS could destroy entire cells, and many operatives paid with their lives. Yet, through ingenious methods, disguises, encrypted radio signals, hidden compartments in freight trains, the network steadily expanded. Refugees were sheltered in monasteries, farms, and remote villages while waiting for extraction, and doctors and psychologists worked tirelessly to heal physical and emotional scars. By 1942, the Liberation Line had already begun to alter the course of the Holocaust. Instead of mass deportations sending millions to death camps like Auschwitz, large groups were diverted, sometimes literally under the noses of Nazi officers. Entire ghettos in Poland and the Baltics managed to evacuate, abandoning their homes but saving lives. Resistance groups in Warsaw and Vilnius provided critical intelligence and manpower to protect escape routes. The Nazis, frustrated and confused by inexplicable disappearances and failed roundups, intensified their brutal crackdowns, but the Liberation Line adapted quickly. International sympathizers, including some within the Vatican and the Red Cross, covertly supported the operation with supplies and diplomatic cover. The British and American intelligence services eventually discovered hints of the network but chose not to fully expose it, fearing reprisals that could endanger more lives. As 1943 turned into 1944, the network reached its zenith. Tens of thousands were being moved each month, flooding safe havens with survivors who would later form the core of the post-war Jewish diaspora. The psychological impact on Nazi morale was profound. Fear and paranoia grew within the SS ranks, knowing their most ruthless extermination plans were being undermined. The operation culminated during the final months of the war. With the Soviet advance on the Eastern Front and the Allied push from the West, the Liberation Line coordinated a massive evacuation of remaining prisoners from concentration camps as the Nazis attempted forced evacuations or death marches. These efforts saved tens of thousands more, including children, elderly, and the infirm, who might otherwise have perished. The aftermath of this alternate history is staggering. Instead of 6 million murdered Jews, the death toll is dramatically reduced. The world witnesses a remarkable post-war recovery of European Jewry, with thriving communities returning to cities devastated by war. The survivors of the Liberation Line become symbols of hope, resilience, and the power of human solidarity in the face of evil. This story challenges our understanding of history by imagining how courage, cooperation, and ingenuity could have altered one of humanity's greatest tragedies. The Liberation Line is a testament to what might have been, a world where millions lived because of secret heroes who refused to accept the darkness. Though this narrative remains fictional, it honors the memory of those who resisted and those who perished, reminding us that even in the worst times, the light of humanity can shine through. You've just glimpsed a world that was never supposed to exist. What if the truth was more terrifying than the war itself? These secrets, disturbing, suppressed, and nearly erased, show us how close we came to a very different future. But some doors, once opened, never close. And some questions may never let you sleep again.